Welcome back to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper, continuing with our world lead as Iraq descends further and further into chaos. The United States is keeping its enemies close. Secretary of State John Kerry saying today that while the U.S. won't be cooperating militarily with Iran, there could be discussions when U.S. and Iranian officials meet to address nuclear issues next week in Vienna. It's almost possible to trace a straight line from the American teardown of Saddam Hussein to the struggle to rebuild a destroyed nation, to U.S. armed forces' perhaps early exit from the country, to now in Iraq possibly devolving into a Sunni-Shia civil war. Here to discuss all this, a reporter who's been covering Iraq since the United States first started Operation Iraqi Freedom, and who has a new piece in this week's New Yorker on the crisis, staff writer for the New Yorker, Dexter Filkins. Dexter, so good to see you. You wrote the seminal book on the Iraq conflict, The Forever War. You spent 3 years in the New York Times Baghdad Bureau, countless other trips around Iraq. You know people who died there. You know Iraqis, you know Americans, contractors, soldiers, citizens. Before we get to the policy of all this and the history, is it personally difficult for you to watch what's going on there?
Well, of course. I mean, I was there in February, and I felt like it was I was in a time machine. You know, I felt like it was 2006 again. I was staying in a hotel in Baghdad, and I was every morning, and I would wake up to the sound of car bombs. You know, and that's really, I mean, that's 2005, 2006 all over again. It's as if, you know, all the money and all the lives that we spent were for naught, and that is depressing. Of course it is. I mean, Al-Qaeda's an Al-Qaeda affiliate in this case is in control of towns across the Sunni Triangle. Yeah, that's depressing.
You summed this all up rather succinctly last week. You wrote, what the Americans left behind was an Iraqi state that was not able to stand on its own. What we built is now coming apart. This is the real legacy of America's war in Iraq. Now, the White House, this White House, argues that they had no choice. The Iraqis wanted U.S. troops out in 2011. Do you think the White House is overstating the case? Could the U.S. have pressed harder and kept enough troops there that this would not have happened?
Well, look, I mean, that was 2.5 years ago when we left. And, you know, if you think back to that time, there aren't a lot of Americans who wanted to stay in Iraq. And so I think public opinion on that point was pretty clear. There were a lot of negotiations. These negotiations went on for months, and the negotiations centered around the question of, do we leave some troops behind? And not combat troops, but basically troops to train and do intelligence. But I think the most important thing was you'd have a lot of troops there, and they would act to restrain the Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, who's a Shiite, from his most sectarian impulses. And that was the idea, because basically, the Iraqi political system, the political system that we helped build, it doesn't really work without us, and that's kind of the great irony of it. And so we spent 9 years building this new Iraqi state after we destroyed the one in 2003, and it doesn't work all that well, and it doesn't stand on its own very well. And so, you know, the question was, do we leave some people behind? And it didn't work out. There was no deal. You know, at one point, Maliki is pretty clear on this point. He says, I told the Americans I would just do an executive agreement, president to prime minister. I'll make a deal with the White House. You can keep some troops here. I won't have to take it to Parliament. And the White House rejected that for what they say were good legal reasons. But I don't know. I think we'll never know now, and it's a little late. But and I don't think we're not going to put troops back there now. But it's a pretty troubling question. Could this have been averted if we'd left some people there?
Dexter, do you think that the United States has an obligation to try to stop this massacre that it looks like could happen in Baghdad?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think. Look, we did have an obligation. I think we came in 2003, whether you supported the invasion or not. The United States destroyed the government there. We were obliged, I think, to rebuild something that would work. We left behind a pretty fragile piece of machinery there that's not standing on its own very well. Does that create an obligation on us? I don't know. I mean, I think it comes down to practical questions now, really. I mean, what can we do? Can we actually do any good there? Or would we just be creating more problems? And I think they're weighing that right now. I mean, what can they do that would actually do some good? those are hard questions.
Dexter Filkins, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.